Thank you all very much. Was it the banker's fault? Which country should we be more like? Somewhere snowy and northern, or somewhere on the other side of the Atlantic, probably. Why aren't people angrier, which may have a time frame in it? And
it's just the tie-in with consumerism, war, and the state we're in now.
Is capitalism in its last moment when it just has to make us go to war?
And are we in danger of having another financial crisis?
And are we in danger of not grasping the lessons radically enough and just creating, which really relates to Rosie's first question. Thank you. If you could use that and also to wind up. And why don't we start with you and go the other way?
Okay, well, I'll take the ones of those I can do. There are 3 questions on banks, I think. Essentially, one of them was why don't we take more money from the banks? Well, I think there's first of all just a factual piece of information we should get across. When one of the woman over here said we've given 1.3 trillion pounds or dollars to banks in bailout, and you sort of essentially made it seem as if that was part of the deficit problem. Let me tell you, it's not. When we talk about the deficit, we're excluding all the money we've given to the banks, because what we're looking at is the deficits that have come from the recession. Essentially, it's come because in October of 2008, we all stopped spending. In the world, tax revenues fell through the floor relative to where we thought they were going to be, and that's caused our deficit. And now we've realised that maybe we're poorer in the longer term than we thought we were, which is why we have to do something about it. Is the banking system open to the same sort of crisis? Yes, clearly at the moment it is, because it's incredibly fragile, and banks are not very healthy yet. They're certainly not going to take the same risks they took in the years before the crisis soon, because memories are long enough that it's unlikely people will take the same risks, and regulators' memories are long enough which will stop them taking the same risks. But we haven't solved the regulatory aspects of the banking system. It is still the case that there will be banks out there, particularly international banks, that will be too big to fail, and we would have to bail them out again. We'd want to get into a situation where we could have a position where we could let them go down and let the creditors take the hit rather than the taxpayer, and that's got to be the situation we want to end up in. And if, as a global community, we don't achieve that, then we really will have not used this crisis properly to create a better form of capitalism. What economic social system would I like to be more like? Actually, I think I'd rather like British, sort of in between the European Scandinavian model and the free market of the West. I particularly like the fact that we can have debates like this and people are interested. And in Britain, where in some countries it's actually rather more difficult. And that doesn't mean it's not a sort of patriotic statement about Britain at all. It's just sort of all of the sort of social and economic systems. I don't think we're that terrible. And finally, does George Osborne, when he says structural deficit, does he mean real deficit? I frankly don't know what he means when he says structural deficit. I know what the technical definition of it. I know how they get their number. I know how they get the number for the structural deficit. But they get it. It's one of these numbers I think is a made-up number. Yeah. So we don't know what the structural deficit is. I mean, in very layman's terms, it's the hole that we have to fill with tax rises or spending cuts. But we frankly have no idea how big that hole is yet, because that will become clear, or maybe not become clear, for very many years to come. We're not going to fill it today. We're not going to fill it in the next 2 or 3 years. It's going to take a while. And we don't know how large it is. And I think it's rather silly for people to pretend they do know where it is. You don't get the Bank of England saying, we know how far the economy is away from its sustainable level, and that is why interest rates are. They say, we have no idea, but except for when Mervyn King says we've got to eliminate the structural deficit within Parliament, he's rather inconsistent on that. There's something we absolutely don't know what it is, but you have to have a plan to get the actual deficit down. Because if you don't, you run the risk of people not being willing to finance you, and you not seeming credible. But you don't need to know exactly how big that is, because that's going to become clear over the next few years.
But the point is, he's spinning like Mandelson on Benzedrine. I mean, that was what he used in his election
I mean,
in his budget speech, he kept talking about structural deficit, and he didn't mean it.
The evidence, when the coalition government came in, one of the reasons they gave for the deficit reduction program that we are now starting was, we've looked at the books, they're far worse than we thought they were. The actual deficit was rather better than the March budget, and the only number that was worse was the structural deficit number. The only way you made that number worse was by assuming the economy was actually closer to recovering than Labour had assumed it was, and the evidence for that is extremely thin.
Thank you.
Thank you. Briefly, I mean, yeah, well, Chris is right that this isn't about the bank bailout, but I agree with you. It seems, I mean, there's a sense of injustice in the country that it's sort of business as usual as far as the bank's concerned, and the government's stake in banking hasn't been used to any great effect, either to force serious reforms or to get more money for the taxpayer. And you know, there are many reasons. We can have a whole debate about the constraints on that, the globalised nature of the banking system, the way where power lies actually. But I think the truth is there's a very strong anger that's brewing about this, and you know, God forbid we see bonuses coming up to Christmas from bankers. But I just feel for fear for social unrest. For a great deal of anger spilling out. Well, the consequences are concerning, and I think that you know, this is what it feels like it's been tucked under the carpet, and we need to hear more from government on that. What kind of economic and social system? You know, I think it's very dangerous to pick one country. I'd like to see, you know, the approach to early years from Scandinavia, the approach to work and life from the Netherlands, the approach to enterprise from the US. You know, you could build our own model. But what's really striking is that, and this is my criticism of the spending review, it's in a vacuum. This is why it's so unambitious, that there is no sense of where we're heading as a country. There's no sense of what we want to be. You know, we're clearly in a mess, and it's clearly going to take us some time to get out of it, but we need to aspire to build bit and great again. I mean, even saying those words sounds a bit preposterous in the current context. So I think that's really lacking. And why are we so accepting of it? Why are we not seeing more demonstrations than there are? Why are we not? It's partly our culture, I think, but it also comes down to voice and power. And I mean, I took part in one of the government's consultations with the public on the cuts, where they pulled together 30 individuals representative across all incomes in the West Midlands, and I was asked to go in as a sort of witness to talk to them, and they were charged. The jury of individuals were judged with coming up with their spending review cuts, which they presented to back to the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. And it was a fascinating process, because I went in on day 3. It was a 5-day process. I went in on day 3. On day 1 and 2, I got calls from the organisers saying, basically, just to warn you, you know, this lot are, you know, they want to get rid of all immigrants. You know, they're really cross about people on benefits. You know, this is what we're hearing, just so you know. And I've got very strange warnings about the attitudes that the group were expressing. I came in and talked about what I've talked about tonight, and the dynamic of the discussion changed, and 2 or 3 people came up to me afterwards and said, I was really scared to speak out, but you know, I'm a carer, I've been struggling on benefits, I don't feel that my voice is being heard. And I just think that typifies our public debate, that there is no one speaking up for that constituency, and there's a fear that, you know, people are not wanting to expose themselves and come forward, and I think that that's just indicative of where power currently lies in our society. And in a sense, although the coalition government talked about this issue during the election, has made very little attempt to address it.